Ahoy there and welcome to Big Red Journeys. I am your host, or I should say Captain Big Red, because today we're here at the Titanic, the exhibition in LA. It's a temporary pop-up museum that's only going to be here till I believe the end of September. But inside this warehouse is going to be actual life-size replicas of some of the staterooms, the hallways, the boiler room, actual side of the ship, and some of the artifacts from those who were a part of the ship, those who unfortunately did perish or did survive. Titanic has a very close place in my heart. One, I'm a big Titanic fan, but really it's also because several years ago I used to work at the San Diego Natural History Museum, and when I got started, Titanic, the artifact exhibition, was one of the special exhibits there and that I would be a part of. And it was just amazing to be there amongst all the artifacts, the memories, the history, the story of Titanic, which at one point was the greatest ship on the world. So, you know, of course, it's probably more well known for the history of its fateful night, but we're going to learn a little bit more about the passengers, the life of the crew, how it was to live on board, experience a little bit. Most of the items in there are actually from the sister ship, the Olympic, which of course was an exact match, mirror image of the Titanic. So you still get to see what it was like for those passengers and the crew aboard Titanic during that fateful trip. So if you care to follow me on this journey, let's go. So right here, we've had a little bit of trouble trying to find it, but there is plenty of parking, which is nice to see. And as you can tell, we are in the right place. Titanic, the exhibition. Let's head on in. We already purchased our tickets online. Admission for today was $39 on a Saturday. I believe if you go during a weekday, it's actually cheaper. Okay, so of course, if you need to purchase tickets, you can purchase tickets right over there. There is a store as well, which we'll check out towards the exit when we leave. One thing to keep in mind about this particular exhibition is that they do talk, the first part is about the history of the White Star Line, the Titanic, the passengers that were on board the ship and the crew. And in the very last little bit of it, it's more about the movie, James Cameron's great masterpiece. Created with an actual beautiful drawing here by Ken Marshall of Titanic. Here's actually the first fun fact. Of the smokestacks, only 3 of them were actually functional. The last one, the 4th one, was not functional, purely for decorative purposes. It was mainly to impose such a strength and look to the ship, because most of the ships during that day would have 2 or 3 stacks at the very most, the largest. So the 4th stack, by adding it, just made it look more impressive. Oh, here towards the front there are also men's and women's restrooms. And looks like we're actually going to be greeted with a call, just like they would call first class passengers to dinner, by Captain Joe, who's going to be here. Let's listen in.
They use this instrument to honor you in that tradition. Now, I remember Molly Brown. Remember Molly Brown in the scene in the movie? She said that, I wish they would stop calling us to dinner like a cavalry charge. Well, I'm not going to do that to you today. What I'm going to do for you is I'm going to honor you in the tradition of the Titanic by playing the theme of the Titanic. Everybody got to have their own theme, don't they? So here we go.
A scale model of that very famous ship. Again, there's the 4 smokestacks, 3 of them functional. And of course, the lifeboats are probably one of the ones that you see is the issue. That was, of course, if we would have had more people would have been saved. But like a lot of people don't really actually understand is Bruce Ismay was the one who actually said he did not like the look of the boats being on the decks. It took up too much space, it cluttered up the look of it, it didn't look impressive. Agreed. But also keep in mind that the ships back then during that time, it was that very common practice for them to be actually sailing next to, and quite often, a ship that would be within a quick distance trip. You know, if there was an SOS or a QCD back then, a ship should have been close to them to be able to rescue them or provide aid whatsoever. It was true, the way that this ship was designed and built, realistically speaking, anything if it hit it front side, direct on, would probably most likely not cause the ship to sink because there would be ballast locks throughout the deck levels. The problem was that when it hit that fateful iceberg, it hit it all along several of the bulkheads. So then the water would just tip. Pretty much if it would have hit the iceberg straight on instead of kind of at an angle, the Titanic actually might have stayed afloat for several more hours, or even possibly even made it to New York, slightly disabled, but it might have made it. We checked in, and first things first is that we were greeted with our official invitation to board Titanic. Now, what's cool about the card is that you're going to get an actual passenger. Let's get some light on here real quick. So on the back is an actual passenger. I am Harry Marklin Molson from Montreal, Canada. I'm a banker. First class, okay. So far things are looking good for me so far. I'm in stateroom C30. I'm a rich playboy and yachts. Oh my goodness, it's like it's a rich playboy and yachtsman. It's like a biography on me, I'm telling you. But you get the card here, and then you're going to learn a little bit about how you would have experienced Titanic as a first, second, or third class passenger, or even potentially a crew. And then at the end, there is a wall that has the classes divided up, and then you get to see whether or not you made it or did not during that fateful night. But before we do, who wants to play some shuffleboard? Anybody? No? Okay, I guess not. You could also get a photo package as well. You get, obviously, you see here, it's the bow of the ship, a green screen on the background, and you get to be king of the world if you wanted to. They also do have some props for the photo as well if you're interested. But we see some photos on the wall here of some of the actual passengers that were on board the ship. Looking to see, oh, there is, I forget the gentleman's name, but that was the father, the preacher who was on board the ship. Very famous. He was the one, he did not make it. He stayed on board at the very end. He is the one in the very famous scene when they're saying I walk through the valley of shadow of death, fear no evil. He's praying with the people that are latched onto him as the ship is starting to finally go vertical. This is him. The shipyards at Belfast, Ireland. You can hear the drilling, the sawing, the machinery going on, a very large replica chain going on right there. Some footage of the actual ships being built in those shipyards. This picture on the wall right here shows a really good cross-section of some of the rooms and areas of Titanic. Here's a lovely photo here of all the different architects and the shipbuilders themselves. You can see how they have the different plans, the blueprints for the various pieces of the ships. These are actually the men who actually designed Titanic and the Olympic. Some more authentic photo postcards of Titanic being built in Belfast. You can see the progress right over there. It just looks like the keel and most of the hull is being built. That's a little bit earlier in the production of the ship. There we go, that one. That one looks like the Titanic is, for the most part, being close to completion. Probably the interior portion still need to be done, but the outside hull and the keel and the bottom of the ship, probably the engine and propellers are already done. Now, it's a little hard to tell, but there's this wood block there, and it also has an engraving of the White Star Line logo. Now, when they were testing the propellers and the engine, they couldn't do it when the ship was in concrete because it actually would have cracked the concrete in the surrounding area. So what they did is when they were building the engine and propellers for testing purposes, they built them on top of these wood blocks. So you imagine tons and tons, or thousands probably, I'm assuming, of these little blocks. And the block itself is only about 3-4 inches tall. And the reason they did that is because the wood would be able to absorb the vibration caused by the propeller and engines being tested before they were to place them into Titanic. Artifacts from the Olympic as well as the Britannic. There's an actual plate, a souvenir plate purchased in 1911 from the Olympic. Here's some photos of the Titanic being launched on May 31st, 1911. Now, to also put a little bit of context with regards to how important Titanic was to the shipbuilders and the people of Belfast, Ireland, and those. One is that Ireland during that time was going through a little bit of a recession. Jobs were scarce, wages were low. So for men and even some women who were able to actually get jobs working, building the Olympic and Titanic was like a dream come true for them. The wages were actually pretty good. It was consistent work, consistent pay. So for them to be able to have this was like, and for lack of a better word, working and living like a king, because they actually had a job that they can support themselves and their families. So Titanic was more than just a ship. It was actually a way for people to survive and live during that time. This is actually pretty amazing. We have a saw, a wrench, an adjustable wrench, as well as a wood ruler that were actually used during the building of Titanic. Someone's little tool chest right here. Look at that. Looks, I hear the beautiful music of an Irish jig happening there, but look at the amazing, look, it's the side of the ship. We're gonna go through that next because it looks like I see the gangway to go inside. But first, oh, here is a display case that has an actual White Star Line employee's vest, buttons, and a hat. Oh, look at the cufflinks as well too. You can see some examples on this photo of employees in their best uniforms. Oh, there we go. Speaking of gentlemen, the millionaire's captain, Captain Edward John Smith, or commonly known as E.J. Smith. And here he is with his officers, the ones who were going to be on the maiden voyage of Titanic, affectionately called the millionaire's captain, one for his jovial nature, his willingness to entertain folks, as well as the fact is that, you know, millionaires actually requested trips to be on and find out they planned their scheduled voyages around the time that he would actually be sailing and captaining the ship. He had over 40 years experience as a captain, and actually he was very close to retirement as he was commissioned to be the captain aboard Titanic. He was pretty much the ace captain for the White Star Line. Unlike popular myth would have it, he was not found in the bridge during the time of the sinking of the ship. He did go down with the ship, but accounts did see him in the water amongst the other survivors initially when the ship was sank. But he did go down. Some accounts actually have one of the exhaust pipes crashing down on him. But of course, we'll never know for sure what happened to him, but we do know that he did go down with the ship. William Murdoch, first officer, who also was the officer in charge of the night Titanic struck the iceberg. He was the one that famously in the movie shot himself. Accounts are still debating on whether or not that was 100% true, but this is the officer that was claimed to have shot himself. Most likely if that was true, it's probably because he felt the guilt of being the one in charge of Titanic on that night that, of course, so many lives were lost. And the other famous would be Second Officer Charles H. Lightoller, right over there, second from the left in the back row. He is the most senior officer to have survived Titanic. Well, we passed inspection, we had our vaccines, and we found no lice, so we're allowed to come aboard. Well, we got the wooden gangway, very similar to how it would be, but yes, this is how it would be. Once you entered into the gangway, this would be how you would be greeted with some of the crew as well, and they would direct you to where your rooms would be. And here we have a beautiful replica, I believe, of the first class hallways of what they would look like. You can see the beautiful ornate architecture on them, the beautiful sconces of lights. The white and the red were the colors inside the areas of the hallways, the public areas of the first class area. There were several variations of being a first class passenger. Just like on traditional cruises, you know, you got suites, super suites, deluxe suites, big rooms, presidential areas. There were two main rooms that were, for lack of a better word, the presidential suites of the time. They would have been the equivalent to, I believe, about $50,000 for passage if you were to purchase them. But the majority of them were actually well-equipped rooms with one or two bedrooms inside. Some of them would have, the first class would have actual private baths, but then second and third class would actually have shared baths. So here you can see a nice replica of the waiting area. A lot of the rooms would have actual waiting areas for you, reception areas, I should say, for you to receive your guests. Look, this is an actual cup and saucer taken off of Titanic. Now, I don't know if this was taken off of the wreckage of Titanic or this is maybe taken prior to the wreck. I couldn't tell you, but that was actually aboard Titanic at some point. I do like how this one you know, people would actually, you know, there was actual fireplaces inside that people can actually use and warm up their rooms with. People would actually put pictures on their mantle, artwork as well, make themselves feel at home. And I do like how there is a silk robe there, very reminiscent of the potential one that Rose may have worn on that very couch, who knows. And there's even some of the butterfly hair clips that she would have potentially worn as well back there. I like how they really try to mimic this room like that very famous scene. Flatware, silverware, dishes and whatnot that first class passengers would be using. Gravy boats, ladles, spoons, toast rack, ice bucket, plates, everything that you can think of. A crumb scoop right here. Got some cigarette tins right there with the White Star Line ships and the logo. A ashtray as well. Cadbury Candy Company, little small advertising cards. Match tin and Olympic Titanic match tins. Wow, match boxes, that's pretty cool. Little chamber pot, as well as some blankets. Now, of course, the chamber pots were so called because they were used for when nature calls during the middle of the night, and maybe you didn't have access to a private bath or whatever the case may be. You use that, go whatever you need to do, and then put it underneath your bed and have your servants or whoever deal with it the next day. Here we have some of the plate and silverware of second class passengers. As you can see, even second class passengers have very ornate items for the time. Funny enough, a lot of passengers that actually were in second class actually thought that they were mistakenly put into first class because of how well ornate second class was to them. White Star Line Titanic brought luxury to a whole new level. Here's a combination of two luxuries. Here on the right we have a chair from the actual dining room of the Olympic second class, but we have a table from the smoking room of Olympic first class. But you can see how both, you know, realistically speaking, you pair them together, you couldn't tell if it was in first class or not, right? Look how ornate and beautiful it is. This actually is probably one of my more favorites of the Olympic and Titanic dishware. It has, I don't know if you can see, we'll try to see if we can show some better lighting. The blue of the glass is kind of stopping, but it has this royal turquoise teal color in there. Really, to me, it looks almost kind of like Egyptian Greco kind of vibe to it, but the color is so beautiful. And of course, the design around all the dishware. And then here is the dining room from the Olympic, but from first class. So you can see how it's padded with the leather and comfortness. So you're not just sitting on the bare wood, you have the leather and the cushion for an enjoyable dining experience. John Jacob Astor, who was at the time the richest gentleman on board Titanic during its sinking, he was just traveling to New York with his much younger, newly married wife, Madeline. And of course there was some controversy there because she was considerably younger than him, and of course he just went through a little bit of a messy separation from his wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife. And she was pregnant at the time, his younger wife, and that was mentioned in the film. John Jacob Astor did not make it off Titanic. He did perish and went down with the ship as a gentleman. The unsinkable Miss Margaret Molly Brown. She, of course, did survive, hence the name Unsinkable, mainly because beforehand she was on a ship not too long ago, and that too sank as well, and she made it off that ship as well. So that's why they labeled her the Unsinkable Molly Brown. Funny enough, I actually visited her house in Denver, Colorado several years ago. It was pretty fun. It was a pretty cool trip to just see some of her artifacts and how she lived over there. She had several homes, and I know she was buried in New York as well, if I'm not mistaken, but she did spend some time in Colorado. Lady Dove Gordon, another of the very famous first class passengers. She is mentioned in the film when Rose is talking about how she creates some scantily items. She was a women's clothing designer as well as a lingerie designer, and that's of course was scandalous for the time. She did survive, I believe, also with her husband, Sir Cosmo Dove Gordon. They were traveling under assumed names because they didn't want to be bothered by people bothering them. You know, hey, Miss Gordon, Miss Gordon, Miss Gordon. They didn't want to be bothered. This gentleman right here, Benjamin Guggenheim, very famous wealthy mining gentleman who had his fame. He was actually traveling to New York to go visit his daughter for her birthday, but he was also traveling with his mistress, 24-year-old cabaret singer Leontine Aubert, known as Ninette. Now, he, of course, is the famous gentleman who went down with his chauffeur and bravely stated, "We are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." Funny enough, people actually disagree with that statement. He did say that, but most likely what it was is because since he was traveling with his mistress, maybe his wife was in New York waiting for him, and he didn't want to catch up in that scandal. So rather go down as a gentleman than get in trouble with the wife when you get back home. Who knows? And the lovely pictured couple who went down with the ship in their staterooms, Isadora and Ida Strauss, of course, co-founders of Macy's department store. They did not want to get separated when Ida was able to get on board a lifeboat, but she did not want to leave her husband. After so many years together, they were inseparable. So she said, "Where you go, I go." And so they decided, knowing that their fates were probably sealed together, to go down with the ship together in love. Well, I would say this is probably what everybody's been waiting for. The grand staircase. Oh, look, I see Jack over. Nope, never mind. That wasn't Jack. But look, and the tile, the floor, the linoleum, which actually, ironically enough, linoleum was brand new invention at the time and actually covered the floor of Titanic in certain areas and was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Ironic, isn't it? Linoleum. But here is the grand staircase, which of course the glass dome right on top, and of course the very famous scene where they meet at the clock, as well as the end when I like to believe, and let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with me like that, but the final scene when after Rose throws the heart of the ocean into the water and I think she dies in her sleep and gets reunited with all the passenger and crew and people who she saw during her experience on Titanic above there, I think that was a reunion of sorts, right? That's how I believe. And then another fun fact to you, the clock up there was actually not completed and installed in time for Titanic. There is no clock up there. It was actually a mirror in place of it for the time being because they weren't able to get the clock in time. So there's actually an inaccuracy in the movie when they say, "Meet me at the clock tower," or "Meet me at the clock." It's not true. It would have been a mirror. Okay. So it looks like we leave the confines of first class and go on to third class or steerage. Now, this is quite common of it. You will be sharing beds here. If you were a single bachelor, they did separate single travelers. Men would stay with other men, women with other women. Families, of course, would stay together. Large families, you maybe have the mother sleeping with 1 or 2 children, 2 or 3 children on each other beds, and father by himself, depending on the needs. There were a amount of large families that would travel. Here's an example of the actual third class heavy blanket that they would wear. I actually have one of these blankets here. These are replicas of some of the blankets. I actually have one of these. But you can see there's a spittoon or a chamber pot right there that they can use for relieving themselves or potentially water for their face or whatever. Places to put their luggage, but very simple, modest accommodations. But remember, this third class was actually comparable to some second and even potentially some first classes with some of the other ships that were sailing during the time. And here is something that I want to talk, it's a little bit controversial, but it were the gates. Yes, there were locked gates on third class and second class for that matter, but not because they were purposely trying to keep third class passengers away to let the first class passengers survive. What it was actually to keep third class passengers away from accessing areas of first class that they weren't supposed to, just in general. Because obviously third class couldn't travel around, first class can go wherever they want, and second class can go into the first class general areas, but they wouldn't be able to go into the dining areas or but they would be able to access places like the walking paths on the deck, as well as some of the amenities. But in the famous scene where everyone's locked in here and they're saying "let us out" for women and children, and there's a porter on the other side, not refusing to let them go through, that was not true. Yes, they weren't able to go through some of the gates, but that was because somebody just couldn't find the keys to unlock all the gates. They would have to literally unlock dozens, if not maybe even 100 gates total to let third class through. So it was true that there was a lot of confusion of people trying to get through these gates, as well as just the language barrier alone. We had literally thousands of people from all across the world speaking different languages. So you have people like, there's that one scene where there's a family, I believe they might be from India, and one of the males is looking through like a dictionary or some sort of like translation book or something like that, trying to figure out how to get to a certain spot, right? That was very true. There was, a lot of people, they were trying to do their best with what they had, but there was no malintent there. They weren't purposely keeping third class away to let them die and let the first class go. It was just confusion of literally everyone for themselves trying to, it's survival, right? People are just trying to get up to the top, figure out which way to go, get to a lifeboat when they can. The problem was, though, is that by the time they actually had the urgency to get people to say, no, you need to go on a lifeboat, already a good portion of the lifeboats were already gone. And third class passenger, by the time they figured it out, most of the boats were already gone at that point with the first class passengers that were able to make it. It was an unfortunate circumstance, which is why they now, afterwards, when they did the acquisition, both a U.S. and a British maritime, they have determined, one, the proper amount of lifeboats need to be required, as well as that is why now, if you ever go on a cruise, it's required and mandatory for you to be part of a boat drill or the evacuation drill because of Titanic. So in a very sad and ironic way, we actually have the disaster of the Titanic to thank for trying to keep, millions of, countless of people alive nowadays from current emergencies. This room's a little bit darker, but that's because we're entering into the boiler room. Now this side, it's a little hard to tell. You can see the top of the blue peeking through that. This thing is probably at least a good 15 to 20 feet tall and circular, of course, so it's just as tall as it is wide, and that is actual size. And they would have coal burning here all day. Men just shoveling coal in here. Coal after a while. Now, one thing that is of interesting note, I'm going to go here with the light. There was actually a fire on board Titanic that not a lot of people know about. When it left Ireland, they put tons and tons and tons of coal downstairs in the hull of the ship. There was actually a small little bit of coal that was on fire, and of course, if you know anything about coal, it's not a quick burn, it's a slow burn residual. So it's deep down in the bowels of the coal that was being used was a fire, and the coal was slowly burning. They didn't realize that until way beyond. It wouldn't affect, obviously, potentially there could have been a fire once they actually made it to New York, but throughout the whole time there was a fire in the vessel and nobody even knew about it. I do have to give credit to these men here. The crew, 891 men and women crewed that ship, and the ones that made it into the boiler room, here's an example of some of the boiler mates going on. They gave their lives up knowing that they weren't going to make it. They knew there was no room for them on the boats, and they knew the main reason why is because they wanted to give Titanic every last little bit of chance of survival, and by doing so was to provide fuel, power and electricity for the radio and the telegraphs, because they knew communication was going to be the key for survival. As long as they can get QCDs or SOSs out there, they had a chance of saving as many lives as possible. So these brave men gave up their lives knowing that. See a door here that looks like it leads to the outside deck. Look, we have a bright, clear, starry night out here. Wow. And yeah, this is actually pretty similar to how it would be. The night the Titanic sank, it was a beautiful, clear sky. The problem with it, though, is that unfortunately that also meant the weather was beautiful and the water was not choppy at all. Meaning that, ironically enough, the crew that was up in the bird's nest, in the crow's nest, they would have actually been able to see the iceberg a little bit ahead of time before, and possibly made a better evasive maneuver if they would have saw some wakes or some waves against the iceberg. It would have been easier to see. Unfortunately, the sky was clear. The moon wasn't as bright as it could be. The stars were beautiful. And also, the other thing too is the binoculars. People would say, why didn't they have binoculars? Well, they did and they didn't. They did because they were planned to have binoculars, but ironically enough, they were locked in a locker that was still left at the dock because nobody found the key to it, and they didn't realize until afterwards. So they also could have the binoculars, but the binoculars wouldn't have done so much good because, again, it would have been hard to see the iceberg due to the conditions of the weather just being. Also, speaking of icebergs ahead, E.J. Smith did receive some warnings, but Bruce Ismay he did pocket quite a few of them because he did not want to stop. He also ordered E.J. Smith to put the boilers to full speed so that, you know, stretch your legs out, like as he says in the movie. One, they wanted to capture the headlines of saying not only was Titanic the grandest ship of all, but was the fastest ship of all, and get there ahead of the printing. Make the headlines. Unfortunately, of course, they did make headlines for a negative way at the end. But the other reason, normally during traffic times, they would have gone slower, or they would have potentially either gone further north or further south during the shipping line. Granted, again, like I said earlier before, the way the maritime was back then is that they tended to take the same route back and forth, so that a ship was nearby within distress time area that they could potentially provide help. So the trick would have been to either do a full stop and just wait until daylight is out, but obviously you lose lots of time and you might get there delayed a little bit later the next day. Or you go much slower, so you have easier time to turn or avoid an iceberg. Another theory is that if they were going to make impact with the iceberg, the safest way actually would have been to hit the iceberg dead on. Yes, it would have actually caused the Titanic to stop, but at the very most, it probably would have only flooded the first 1 or 2 bulkheads because of the design of it. It would have impacted. It's like you hit a car bumper, boom, your bumper crashes, but at least it didn't hit the doors, it didn't hit the side. You go, you're fine, you radio for help, maybe you get towed back into harbor, maybe you can make it just slowly but surely and keep an eye on the water log. But yeah, there's a few factors, of course, hindsight is 20/20. 8 full hours. Yep. So now this hallway provides some of the warnings that Titanic did receive throughout the day, starting at 9 a.m. on April 14th from the RMS Caronia. Captain, Titanic westbound steamers report bergs, growlers, and field ice in 42 degrees north, 49 degrees to 51 degrees west. Compliments of Captain Barr. Another one a couple hours later, April 14th, 1912, from the RMS Baltic. Greek steamer Athenia reports passing icebergs and large quantities of field ice today around the same degrees. You see, 41, 51 degrees, and longitude 49, 52. So around the same area, there was quite a few icebergs. Just a little bit later, 3 minutes later, from the SS America, passed 2 large icebergs. Same vicinity, roughly. 9:30, just a few hours before the collision, from the SS Masaba. We saw much heavy pack ice and great number of large icebergs, also field ice. Weather good and clear. Again, key word. Weather good and clear. Beautiful for sailing, terrible for visibility at night. And from the SS Californian, we are stopped and surrounded by ice. Now, if memory serves me correctly, I also believe the SS Californian was also the ship that actually passed by the Titanic when it was in the process of sinking, but they weren't aware of what was going on. They couldn't tell, they weren't able to communicate with Titanic during when it was still upright in the water. You can hear the ominous sounds in the background over there. I think we're heading towards an iceberg. This, of course, is a replica of the bell from the RMS Titanic of the Crow's Nest, where the gentleman on watch would have rang it to alert the officers. And sure enough, iceberg right ahead. Oh, this is actually a life vest from the movie Titanic. Look at that. A real photo postcard of Titanic's lifeboat survivors from the Carpathia. That's a very famous photo right there of during the crack of dawn. Oh, we just hit the iceberg. We just hit it. But that's actually a very famous photo of when the break of dawn, after the Carpathia was able to finally reach the area where the survivors were at. That's one of the very first photos. Now also keep in mind, one of the fears that people had not only about the sinking of the ship, but was actually going onto lifeboats, because they weren't even sure. They were going into the dark of night in lifeboats floating afloat. They don't know if maybe there was a boat on its way coming to them, if they were going to have to lay adrift in water for days, months, weeks, who knows. People were fearful because they didn't know what was going to happen to them. Luckily enough, the Carpathia did make it to them a few hours later. But there was a lot of fear going on about what could have happened to them during that whole time. Against the wall here, we have a timeline of the transmissions that Titanic released during the last few hours of its voyage. Starting at 12:17, CQD SOS Titanic position. Coordinates require immediate assistance. Come at once. We struck an iceberg. Of course, CQD was the early equivalent to SOS before SOS was invented. So that's why, especially in the first message, they said both of them because they weren't sure who's listening if they use CQD or SOS. And then, as you can see, at 2:10, Captain Smith returns to the wireless operating room to relieve operators Harold Bride and Jack Phillips from their posts, but they refuse for a sense of duty and continue signaling. RMS Titanic, heard by Virginian at 2:17 CQ, and that was it. And then shortly thereafter, power was completely lost and Titanic went silent. The timeline of the actual sinking itself. April 14th, Sunday, 11:40, from the crow's nest, Frederick Fleet sees an iceberg looming directly in Titanic's path, rings the brass warning bell, iceberg right ahead. It was relayed to the officer in command again, Mr. Murdoch, who gave the order hard to starboard, which was swinging the ship's bow to the port in an attempt to avoid the collision. And per the inspection and how sound she was, Mr. Andrews calculated that only about 2 hours of time remained for her to stay afloat. About 20 minutes later, at 12:02, Captain Smith hears the information and readies the lifeboats for lowering. 12:40, boiler room 5's bunker doors collapse, allowing a rush of water to flow in, and then causes Titanic to experience a noticeable heavy downward. 1:25, Lightoller directs lowering of portside lifeboat number 12 with 43 people. On the opposite side of the ship, starboard lifeboat number 11 is overloaded with 70 people. The boat was built for 65. The engine room is now filled to the bunkers with water. The last distress rocket is fired. The foredeck is now underwater as portside lifeboat number 4, the first to be ready but the last to be lowered. It has 42 people on board. 2:20 a.m., the ship finally breaks into two just behind the third funnel. Titanic's bow sinks to the ocean floor, leaving her stern poised, almost perpendicular to the sea's icy surface, and after a short few moments afloat, it slips 3,800 meters, 2.5 miles, to the bottom of the ocean. Almost 2 hours later, at 4:10, the SS Carpathia arrives and starts to begin taking in survivors from lifeboats number 2 aboard. Because the ship had only enough room to recover 14 Titanic's lifeboats, 3 lifeboats and 3 collapsible boats were set adrift and abandoned at sea after survivors were offloaded onto the Carpathia. At 5:10 a.m., lifeboat number 7 is the last boat to offload passengers onto Carpathia. Right here is the iceberg. There is some touch plates here. Now, freezing temperature is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. The water that day in the sea would have actually been about 2 degrees colder because salt water actually takes a lower temperature to freeze. So just imagine freezing water, but even more than that. It's literally a frozen ice plate. Let's see. I've only been doing this for a few moments, and already I want to move my hand. Just imagine your whole body. You're jumping into water that's colder than this. And we're into the final room where we talk about the aftermath of what occurred. Obviously, there's a photo from the Carpathia of some of the survivors in the lifeboats. How news of the tragedy struck, reaching all around the world within hours. Here is unfortunately, this is a gold swimming medal that was recovered off the body of Edward Lockyer, a passenger who did perish, unfortunately, on that day. Like I said, there was some investigations that happened afterwards. Both the United States and the British inquiries arrived at certain conclusions. The U.S., unknowingly or unwittingly, don't know, did not put any blame, but they did recommend that all vessels sailing into American port be equipped with enough lifeboats for everyone on board, or they would lose their license to carry passengers. The British inquiry did put blame that Titanic was speeding when it hit the iceberg, that lifeboats were properly lowered but insufficiently manned, as well as that and that there was no discrimination against third-class passengers, like unfortunately the movie does say. And then of course, they again also recommended the lifeboats have enough for everyone on board. So, and as another direct result, Titanic sinking, the International Ice Patrol was established in 1913 to monitor icebergs in the North Atlantic shipping lanes. Here's an actual flag from the White Star Line. Now, White Star Line actually still remains active to this day. You may know them now as Cunard lines. Here's a photo postcard of the Fairview Lawn Cemetery in Halifax. Now, a lot of those that weren't able to be returned to their families were given proper burials in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Canada. Of course, the lore of the wreck of the Titanic has spurred many books, as well as movies, of course, being the most famous, the 1997 film from James Cameron, Titanic. Some postcards, church cards, memorial cards as well. And that one's actually, so nearer my God to thee, and that one's actually relevant because that was actually the song that was being played by the band as the ship was going down. A very famous and popular tune at the time. And speaking of the band, one thing I did want to say is that the band itself, even though they were actually hired by White Star Line for the voyage, they actually weren't employees of White Star Line, they were actually just contractors. So at no point in time did they have to actually follow the rules and regulations of an employee of White Star Line. They could have at any point in time said, you know what, I'm getting on one of these lifeboats, sorry about it, I'm out of here. But they decided not to. They knew that their time was to be spent providing comfort as best as they can for those towards the end moments, providing some sort of calmness and solemn for those who knew that maybe this was their last moments, providing some peace, preventing pandemonium to a certain degree. But these gentlemen played their last songs and died as true heroes, in my opinion. And here is the wall where you can take a look to see if your passenger made it or not. As you can see, the list of those who were lost on the top strikingly outnumber those who were saved at the bottom. The names. Now again, we're looking for Harry Molson, and sure enough, I already see the name, but looks like, oh well, it looks like I did not make it, unfortunately. I'm right there. Well, maybe I like to think that Mr. Molson provided his spot to someone. Well, looks like there's another room here. This one's actually pretty cool. This one talks more about the wreckage of the Titanic. As you can see here, we're actually walking on some glass. Representative of the various glass and dish fields that are surrounding Titanic. They are actually literally thousands upon thousands of pieces of plates and whatnot that actually line the ocean field just like this. This is actually very accurate. There's the faithful binoculars that should have been at the crow's nest. Now, one thing that's pretty cool is I like this right here. This just shows the pressure at that depth of where Titanic is at. There's a styrofoam cup. They would actually take styrofoam cups just to show the pressure. You see how they have designs on them? They draw on them. The pressure from the water, they would actually expose these cups out in the water as they go down. It would compress the foam so tight. Look at that. So I was correct in saying that the California was the vessel that did see Titanic during its sinking, when they could see that they were seeing rockets from above. Now, the captain, Stanley Philip Lord, claims to have never been able to see the rockets. As you know, question as to why his inactions, because when the inquiries happened through the U.S. and British inquiries happened, they realized that the California could have potentially saved many more lives, if not all the lives, during the sinking. So he was criticized for his inactions. No charges were ever put and filed against him personally, but his name was pretty much sunk in the mud at that point. And speaking of sinking, ironically enough, the Californian was destroyed by a German submarine during World War I. And here is the final room. This is going to have the items that were actually from the film. This is a stunt vest, only one of only 6. Now, I'm thinking potentially that could be something that maybe pops blood out, or maybe like it was during when he was shot, like Fabricio, when he was, when that stunt guy was shot, and then one of the people took the life vest off of him. Maybe that's the one that had it. Who knows? There's a Silver Star menu holder prop, a set of keys from the Cafe Parisian, a miniature deck chair, scale model. All these are replica movie costumes. Okay, so we have the flying dress, which of course was worn by Miss Rose DeWitt, the bouqueter, and then Jack's peasant robes that he would wear right here. Oh, it is a, okay, so this is a limited edition replica of the drawing of Rose. You know, when she was drawn like one of his French girls. Funny enough, so even though obviously Leonardo DiCaprio is depicted as drawing that picture, it was actually James Cameron's hand that was drawing the portrait. They would just swap in and put Leo at a certain angle, but the hands were actually James Cameron. And here is a prop replica of the original necklace that was worn by Rose, aka Kate Winslet. The Cour de la Mer. Now, part of this was actually, at least from my understanding, is that the Heart of the Ocean was based upon the fact that people thought that the Hope Diamond was actually on board the Titanic, because the Hope Diamond was, of course, cursed. So they believed that only a cursed item like that would bring down the Titanic, and that led to the lore of the Heart of the Ocean, etc., etc. But of course, the Hope Diamond never was on Titanic, and neither was the Heart of the Ocean, neither was Rose, and neither was Jack. But there actually was a crew member by the name of Jay Dawson on board the ship. So, and in movie script, screenplay from the actual film. So it's kind of funny that this ticket is in reverse. Now, one thing during the filming of Titanic is that they actually had a full-scale replica of Titanic, but it was actually only one half of Titanic. So what they did is that when they had to flip it to the other side, they would actually reverse all the items, so it looks like it would be the different side. I don't know which side of the Titanic was built, if it was the port or the starboard side, but whenever they did the opposite side of thing, everything, even the text and wording of certain signs or whatever case, but would be reversed just to make it look like it was the other side of the ship. And here's a funny little photo spot. You can actually replicate yourself as Jack and Rose on the board, the door that float. Now, yes, both of them could have easily fit on there. There's no question about it. There was plenty of room for both of them. Jack didn't have to die that way. She could have made room. She was being selfish. It's like her covering up, taking all the blankets. She just took all the door. That's all. And of course, as always, things do end in a gift shop. And there are some Titanic branded items. We have t-shirts available, notebooks, mugs. Oh look, hey, I like that shirt. I think I should get it. Schematic blueprint, notebooks, blankets, coasters, mugs, you name it, they got a Titanic label all over here. They even have some replica pieces of jewelry, so you can purchase yourself your own Cour de la Mer. Well, that is going to do it for today's journey here at the Titanic exhibition in LA. I had a wonderful time. I hope you did as well too on this voyage. I'm going to wait right here because I got told by somebody to meet them here at the clock. But before I do and leave you behind, I'm going to say, hope you enjoyed this video. You know, Titanic, again, it's close to my heart, and I hope after watching this video, you know a little bit more about Titanic, the true story of it, as well as maybe you are enriched with the knowledge, the facts, and the history of that most wonderful of ships that unfortunately had that fateful night so many years ago. Also, if you like this video, do me a huge favor, give this video a big thumbs up for me. Second, subscribe if you haven't done so already. And third, hit that notification bell. Have a lot more journeys headed your way. As well as follow me on social media, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, @BigRedJourneys. So from me to you, this guy over here, I thank you. And of course, let me leave you some fine words to always making it count. Bye-bye now.